What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys that was in love and worked with, and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Well, I am just amazed at the people that I can get on this show that have just incredible, unbelievable stories. And I've got one today. You might have heard of him. It's Robert Simels. If you've run around anything in New York and, you know, big celebrity trials or you got big drug pen names and high profile, you've probably heard of Robert Simels because he's the guy that takes those and wins those cases. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on him. Robert, in his early days in the 70s, was a prosecutor with an elite anti-corruption prosecution office in New York City, prosecuting police, lawyers, judges, politicians, obviously doing that, earning the ire of many in his profession. Then he switched teams, went over, and he became an incredible defense attorney for the next 35 plus years. And when I say incredible, he was one of those guys that took on the feds with high profile cases and clients and won. He won cases. It was, and there's cases too that we were just talking about before we got on. Henry Hill, as all of you probably know that name somewhere back in there for the Goodfellas. He was involved, obviously represented Henry Hill, but negotiated and helped with the book, The Wise Guy. And that movie obviously became the incredibly successful movie, Martin Scorsese movie, the Goodfellas movie. And and Robert was just telling me a funny story about something that happened on set. Other things that, I mean, some of these things just kind of blow my mind. He was representing Christopher Drogo, a banker in Atlanta. And this guy was facing life in prison for loaning Saddam Hussein billions of dollars. And someone decides that, no, this is all wrong. This guy's being set up as a fall guy. He ends up subpoenaing George H.W. Bush, Henry Kissinger, Jim Baker, Brett Scowcroft, basically the higher echelon of the whole United States, and the government folds like a cheap tent. And it's crazy how this all transpired. But the case that took Robert down his own nightmare path to prison was representing Shahad Khan, a drug kingpin from Guyana. Robert received 14 years charged with attempted witness tampering. Since his release, he's worked as a legal consultant, hosted a radio show. He's been a speaker at Yale University and other high-profile venues. I can't wait to jump in to this interview with Robert. Before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor. You know, who likes spending a couple weekends walking car lots, looking for a car. Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in a dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a trip to the dentist. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle. Get in a car, Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. And they also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge, the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Robert Simels, welcome in. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure. I listen to your podcast. Always interesting and enlightening for sure.
Well, I appreciate that, Robert. And you're getting on here. We were just talking about we didn't have to worry about technology in prison, but for some reason, Robert was able to get on with his cell phone, but not his laptop, and we have no idea why that is because we're not technology wizards, but we are seeing each other. You guys will see Robert, and we're set up. So, Robert, your story, and I was telling you this before we hit the play button. I mean, you've been all around. You know, you've played yourself in different things. You've been involved, obviously, with the Henry story and becoming the Goodfellas and the wise guy and all that. But take us back a little bit in your story before you came into all that. What was life like for you growing up? What was Robert's life as a kid?
I had a really good life. My father was a dentist. My mother was a homemaker. I grew up in Westchester County, which is right outside of New York City. Uh, I thought I was going to be a baseball player and wanted to be, and I
What
played.
position did you like, Robert? What kind of baseball were you?
I played outfield, and then realized that if I became a catcher, I had a much better chance of being picked up by the major leagues. Any number of people I grew up with from the time I was a little boy became major league players. Um, and we all thought we'd be there together. At some point in the early 1960s, my mother convinced me that I would make more money becoming a doctor or a lawyer
Okay.
rather than the $5,000 bonuses that they offered to college players at that time.
A little different.
You think of it, kids in college make more than that with the NIL deals.
Oh, I mean, some of those kids are getting paid millions.
Yeah. So,
whole different world. So your mom tells you that, hey, let's think about this, Robert. Let's think about doctor or attorney. So did you have at that time? Because I mean, I can see how you could make that transition. I mean, playing sports, very competitive. You keep score. You know, you play if you're good. And I, my dad was an attorney, and you win, you lose, you call, you are the guy. And so I can see how that would have worked for you. Did it automatically click in your head, hey, I like law?
actually, I always liked law. In the 50s, of course, it was Perry Mason, the number one show on TV.
Yeah.
Probably unknown to many of the people who listen to your podcast, but they should, they have the opportunity. They should go back and look at those.
It's a great show.
Great show. And Perry was everything that I would hope I was as an attorney, including the same kind of winning record that he had. But also, I had a relative who was a successful attorney. And he, when I was 9 years old, gave me a book called Llewellyn, that was the author, on jurisprudence. And he
At
was
9 years old.
9 years old, and I read it. And
I mean, if you think about that, Robert, that's like a what, second or third grader that's taking on a book like that.
I know it was strange. I went back, tested me on what I learned, but I just put it in the back of my mind because playing for the Yankees or the Dodgers was much more
number one. Yeah.
at that stage. And then when I was in college, I realized that becoming an attorney might be the way to go. And that's the direction I went. I was, strangely enough, the other day on Facebook, I got a request to join up with someone, make them my friend, who I haven't seen since I'm 11 years old. And he played on the same Little League team as I did and reached out to me.
The magic of Facebook.
And thinking of that, I was saying back when I was 11 years old, I was actually a good ball player in the Little League in my area. And we had, as I said, future major league players like Kenny Singleton of the Baltimore Orioles, who was my childhood friend. In any event, they didn't allow blacks to play back then. And I ran into, was watching a minor league game one day, and there was a fellow named Johnny Richardson who played for one of the teams. He was great. So I went to my manager and I said to him, we ought to put this kid on our team. And he said, well, maybe not our team, but let's see if I can get him on another team. And I kept badgering him to do something. And they finally did, and he finally got into the Little League. And I didn't really understand why we didn't do those kinds of things.
Why it was a big deal. Yeah.
Fighting for the underdog and fighting for people of color became part of what I did as I undertook my private practice.
Hmm.
The Hill is not one of those people, but most of my clients that I represented in the major narcotic trafficking cases were people of color, and it inured to uh, the government disliking me more because I was representing those people
Sure.
than if I was representing somebody charged with the same crime who was white.
Yeah.
But the system is and continues to be very prejudiced.
Yep. It's lopsided. Well, I'm curious, you know, coming out, and you were a young man when you went into this elite prosecutor office. Uh, and and it's talked about that you were very, very good at it, and had an aggressive style of how you went about, getting your people. But in that realm you were in, those were people that were, like it talks about, they were politicians, they were judges, they were police officers. Did you realize at that time that you were wading into the den of a fight of what people around you in your world would think?
You know, when you're a prosecutor, you always think you're on the side of the angels.
Yeah, the
And
white knight. Yeah,
you see everything in black and white terms, and a guilty person's a guilty person, and no matter what you think about them, that's the way you view them. And you look to put them away for as much time as you can put them away because really you have no appreciation for the gray in life.
right.
And when that office was created, the New York State Special Prosecutor's Office, it was as a result of hearings that had been held in New York City demonstrating that the police department, New York City Police Department, was almost entirely corrupt. We've seen that in part through movies like Serpico.
Hmm. That's what I was thinking of, is that movie. Yeah.
And Serpico, if you've seen the movie, and if you haven't, you should see it. It's a very good performance by Al Pacino.
Hmm.
It talks about how corrupt every officer basically was in the police department. And if you didn't participate, you were an outcast
Right. Ostracized.
and
Yep.
get hurt, like Serpico was. And so my office was created, and we had 35 attorneys, and we had 100 of our own investigators, and we were investigating the criminal justice system. And as long as we prosecuted cops, and there were plenty to prosecute, everything was hunky dory. The
Hmm.
press loved us. We were applauded in all circles. And then we decided to start targeting judges, politicians, lawyers. At that point, we weren't so popular anymore.
How old would you have been, Robert, at that time? You were in your 20s?
I was 25.
Because I guess you had gone through law school, so you'd be,
Yeah.
yeah, a young man.
Yeah. And it was exciting. We were really the prince of the city in terms of how we were going after all these theoretically not only corrupt.
Well, it was the 70s, too. I mean, it was a time when that was all going on. Yeah.
Corruption, is not simply taking a bribe. Corruption is doing a favor for somebody else with the anticipation you'll get something on the back end.
Right.
And you could whisper to a judge at lunch, "Listen, we need you to do this for the political club," and the judge would do it. And you never knew that corruption was taking place. But we were there to make sure that we could either root it out or suppress it. And we were very, very successful in doing it. We indicted 11 judges. We indicted the state Democratic chairman, Pat Cunningham. We were very, very active people. And then a new governor came in who was part of that political party we were investigating, Hugh Carey, and he turned around and called our boss in on December 23rd, 1975, and we thought he was going to give us statewide jurisdiction because we had
So
done
good.
good.
Yeah.
And our boss, Maureen Najari, came back from the meeting and he said, I got fired. And although we fought to keep him and did for a little bit, he ultimately was replaced. The replacement tamped down our investigations. They tried to get rid of everybody on the Najari staff as being overly zealous.
Mm-hmm.
But we were doing what we thought was appropriate. I had some very big prosecutions. I prosecuted a state judge, convicted him. I prosecuted the highest ranking member of the New York City Police Department ever prosecuted. I caused the police commissioner, his first deputy, and 25 other senior officers from the rank of inspector and above, chief, to resign. So I helped change the face of the New York City Police Department by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you know what? I'm leaving. But the people we investigated never forgot, not just simply me, but all the people from my office. No matter where we went in our professional lives, we were reminded that we had been part of that office because they all felt they were
Yeah.
investigated. And
Sure.
and the myth of the office was greater than the actual actions of the office.
Yeah.
They believed that our boss had a private elevator that took you from the bottom of the World Trade Center up to his office on the 57th floor. They believed we had bugs and wiretaps all over the city. And they were afraid to talk because they thought they were being intercepted.
Mm-hmm.
Not true. I mean, you can't wiretap that many people, but
The myth could grow.
the myth grows. And so I left and went into private practice. It was
What was that? Because there's a lot of guys that do that. I mean, it's, you see that a lot. You see, people in the U.S. Attorney's office and they turn into these incredible defense attorneys. Does that feel like, what does that feel like when you're on the prosecutor side and then you all of a sudden are a criminal defense attorney?
for me, it was just walking out the door. My ethics stayed the same. My approach stayed the same. Just I was doing it for people who I used to prosecute, but maybe weren't so guilty after all. Or even if they were guilty, were entitled to the full spectrum of how to be protected in the system.
Sure. And like you said, you go in a black and white world into a more of a gray world because the criminal defense, I mean, and we've talked about this so many times on this show, but there is nothing like the United States of America versus your name. And I think one of the things that's most fascinating about your world of what you created with your as an attorney is that you went into that world where no one mostly doesn't win, and you went in with a vigor and took on big cases and won big cases.
And there are different types of attorneys for different kinds of cases.
Mm-hmm.
Not every attorney can do every kind of case.
Mm-hmm.
Not every attorney who does practice in the state courts can practice in the federal courts. Federal courts are a lot more sophisticated. There's a lot more paperwork, a lot more research, and a lot better talent in the prosecution's office than there are at the state level.
State level, yeah.
In the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, there are 500 assistant district attorneys. In the Southern District of New York, the federal office, there are 50. So they're a much more elite group. You can't even go to that office as an assistant U.S. attorney unless you've been in private practice 2 years before you apply, and they only take people from the big firms. So I said to myself, I'm good enough, I can compete against anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And all I have to do is follow the same footprints that I use as a prosecutor, and I should be successful as a defense attorney. Except I didn't realize how upsetting that would be for prosecutors.
Right. Well, and The Henry Hill case that came fairly soon, wasn't that like in 1980?
So in May, I'll tell you a quick story, if I can make this quick. On Memorial Day, Friday of 1980, I was in my office about 4:15 in the afternoon, probably the only attorney in New York who wasn't in the Hamptons,
Mm-hmm.
uh, vacationing that weekend. And I got a call from Judge Mark Constantino's office, his chambers, and they asked me to go over to the Brooklyn Federal Courthouse to witness someone signing a document. I said, "Oh, of course, Judge." And I went, and the prosecutors tell me, "Listen, have them sign the agreement, and we're going to have the marshals take them away." And if you've seen the movie, you know that at that time, the Nassau County District Attorney's Office was prosecuting Henry for all that narcotic trafficking
Right.
that he was doing. And so he had 4 what we call A1 indictments against him, life sentence indictments for narcotic trafficking. And they were there and they said, yeah, if he does it, we'll go along with it. All he has to do is plead guilty to a couple of crimes. So he'll be a more credible witness when he testifies against everybody else. Because if you admit that you committed the crime, the jury will like you better and will think worse of the other co-defendants.
Mm-hmm.
I say, let me talk to the guy. I don't know anything about him, but never heard of him. Walk in, he describes who he is, tells me that they want to talk to him about the Lufthansa robbery, the biggest robbery.
The airport. Yeah.
And I talked to Henry for a while, and I say,
$6 million, wasn't it?
6 million.
Yeah.
That
1980s. It was a little bit before 1980, but it's a lot of money.
that we know of. It was 1978 when the
Yeah.
well, that we know of. It could have been more, but Jimmy Burke, the main guy portrayed by De Niro,
Robert De Niro,
never really told anybody how much money there was. In any event, I go back to the prosecutors and I say, he's not pleading guilty to anything. They said, you'll undercut our cases. And I said, I don't really care. Then he's not going to do what you want. And they both agree to do that. And Henry signs it, and the marshals take him, and he's off to the federal witness program. I'm fast forwarding it, but the biggest obstacle was Henry's wife's mother, who you see in the movie as being a very difficult.
Yeah, she didn't like him coming home late, and all that.
She was a middle-class Jewish woman from Long Island, and didn't like this. And I had to explain to her what was going to happen. And she yelled and screamed and screamed and yelled. But ultimately, they agreed. She didn't agree. But ultimately, Henry and Karen, the wife, agreed. And they went off with the marshals. And I figure, I'm done. Goodbye. The following Monday, I hear from the federal prosecutor that the Nassau County District Attorney's Office has broken the deal and Henry is going to continue to be prosecuted out there. And I say, well, I'm going to move to get this case dismissed. I'm prosecutorial misconduct. They made us a promise, and now they're backing out. And the feds kept saying to me, the federal attorneys I knew kept saying, don't do it. You'll make an enemy of the Nassau County DA. And I said, I don't care.
I don't care.
And so I made the motion, and we had a very interesting hearing. It would take longer to describe than the program, but we had helicopters over the courthouse and SWAT teams outside, and marshals with sawed-off shotguns and automatic weapons in the courtroom. And ultimately, I subpoenaed the notes of one of the assistant district attorneys who had been in a meeting with the district attorney that following Monday, and he had said, in essence, screw the feds, we'll get no publicity if we don't continue to push our case. And that statement, coupled with the other proof, caused the judge to dismiss all the charges against Henry. But now I was putting in more and more time with Henry because the feds don't really know too much about what they're doing ever. I know that they think they're very bright, but it's usually defense attorneys don't win cases. Feds or prosecutors lose cases.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who make the mistakes that we capitalize on. If you've seen Perry Mason, you know that it's every case that Perry Mason capitalizes upon the prosecutor Hamilton Berger's failure to do something. In any event, they're so focused on Lufthansa that they can't think of anything else. And Henry keeps telling them, I wasn't there the day before. I don't know. I was out of town. I wasn't there the day before. I was out of town. Finally, after listening to this for weeks, and then becoming frustrated with Henry, the agents and the prosecutor in charge, I go to the head prosecutor and I say, listen, here's what's happening. But they never asked Henry where he went, that he was out of town. And so he decides to walk in with me and to casually ask, what's going on? And did you ever ask Henry where he went when he went out of town? And they said, no, but all right, where'd you go? And he said, oh, I went to Boston because we were fixing the basketball team at Boston College so that we could win games on betting. So the prosecutor thought we were pulling his leg because he played basketball at Boston College,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately he did not. And they used that basketball fixing to prosecute many people. And so worked out for them. The more and more time I was spending with Henry, and now I had the mafia, I lost them as clients because they won't.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting in your story too, Robert, is that you kind of wanted to be a mafia attorney, and that really knocked it in the head that you were dealing with Henry, who was seen as a rat. And
yeah, there are three kinds of clients. There are white collar clients. There aren't that many of them. There are people of color who are involved in, or others who are involved in narcotic trafficking. And then there's the mafia. By representing Henry, cut out that whole
a
segment
whole mafia segment, yeah.
because they wouldn't hire the guy who represented the biggest rat of all times.
Yeah.
So I said to Henry, maybe you have a story here that I could peddle. And I tried peddling it from this coast, the East Coast to the West Coast, and I met with Warner Brothers, and I met with this and this. Kept going on and on. And finally, I got an appointment after a year and a half with the head of Simon & Schuster, Dick Snyder. And I go to the meeting, and he's not there, but the head editor of Simon & Schuster, the biggest book publishing company in the world at that time, Michael Corder, was there. And I tell Michael what the story is that I envision, and he says, we don't do mafia stories. And we're never doing this book. And thank you very much for coming in. And he and I walk to the door, and I'm about to leave, and in comes Snyder barging through the door. And he says to me, oh, quickly, tell me what happened. And I tell him while we're standing in the door about my concept for Henry's story. And he says, this is the greatest story I ever heard. We're definitely doing this book. Don't Michael. Says, I was just saying the same thing. And
And so goes the story. What a story, though.
We had to sneak around because Henry was in the witness protection program. They didn't want an author meeting with him. So I had to pick an author. I had to get Henry to like the author. We had to set up clandestine meetings to meet the authors. And Nick Pileggi was the guy we liked, and he's the one who got the job and did a great job. And
did a great job. You got to share the story about where because you said you went to some of these locals when they were filming Goodfellas, and I forget where you said you were. They were talking, and I don't forget who was around the table, but can you share that?
One day, while they were shooting a segment of the movie, and it's a portion of the movie where they are in a diner and they're sitting at the table, De Niro and Liotta, Henry and Jimmy, I forgot what his name was in the movie again.
Jimmy Burke, I think, wasn't it?
Real name, but Jimmy Connery, Connell, something.
Yeah.
And so Henry smoking in the movie, Leota, and he's smoking Marlboros and he's lighting up with matches. And I'm sitting at the table next to one of the cameras talking to somebody, and I'm saying, you know, Henry never smoked Marlboros, always only Winston's. And he used to use a lighter. They used to click open all the time. And an assistant director came by and he said to me, hey, Marty heard what you said and he wants quiet on the set. He doesn't want accuracy. Marty had told all the actors, not Scorsese, not to speak to Henry. But De Niro spoke to him 25 times a day. So did Leota. They kept calling him, whatever. And Henry was crazy because it didn't matter to Henry that everybody knew where he was. That's just his personality. And that's why he got thrown out of the witness protection program. But so now they take a break in the shoot. And when they come back, I see that Leota has Winston's and a lighter.
So somebody did care.
Scorsese might have not cared, but he cared.
Well, I'm curious too. Like when you start getting into these bigger cases and these things that are going on with your family, were you guys just treated kind of like the normal people in the neighborhood, or was there kind of a different vibe?
You know, we were very, other than the people in New York City, we moved out of the city to the suburbs. And when my daughter was born in 1994, and from then on, the people in our neighborhood really didn't have much knowledge of who I was. We were an hour and 20 minutes out of the city, so I really kept that part of my life somewhat on the down low. If you saw me on TV, you might say it. If you saw me on Court TV, you might say something, or 60 Minutes, or because I was on all of those. And but for the most part, we were low key, all about family and gardening on the weekends or whatever we were doing.
Well, I know, like when you're an attorney, it's like, you know, even like if you're comparing it back to sports, you think you've got this one case and you're like, that's the one that gives me the confidence that knows I'm really good at this. This is what I might even be better than a lot of these guys. Did you have a case like that where you're like, yeah?
Every case.
Every case after you won. That's a great answer, Robert.
So I started off, my first big defense case was the first money laundering case. That is where people were accused of taking money from illegal operations and cleaning it up. It's called money laundering. The first ever prosecuted in the United States. United States versus Edward Orozco Prada. And that was in 1983. And I represented one of the 5 defendants, the only one who was acquitted. And from there, I was hired by the quarterback of the New York Jets, Kenny O'Brien. He and Mark Gastineau, who was a defensive end, very well known back then.
Very well known, yes.
I got into a fight in Studio 54, a very famous nightclub back then. And I represented Kenny. And the way I won for my client in Orozco Prada and how I won for O'Brien in that case was undermining the prosecutor for having not done something appropriate. They hid the criminal record background of one of their witnesses. I uncovered it. So I kept ticking off the prosecutors because I was winning, but I was winning by showing them to be untrustworthy. And if you can't rely upon the government, then you have to acquit. And that was my way of proceeding. Having been a prosecutor, I knew what they did, and I wanted to see whether those things were done appropriately in each case. And over the course of the years, you found out that they were lazy for the most part, and they relied too much upon their agents who weren't that smart in the first place.
Well, and you also have a situation where a lot of people don't go to trial. So, you think that all the time trials are going on and on and on. So many people don't go to trial. So I think the anticipation that that's not going to happen and it happens means that there's it's like jumping in a moving car to catch up on the fact, hey, we're really going to trial. And that in itself is, Robert, you were in the world of the guy that went to trial, and that you're playing in a smaller little network there.
They made it easy for me because once I started representing people of color in narcotic cases that were big cases, they offered 30 and 40-year pleas to these guys. They weren't going to take that kind of plea. They were
right. Why not take the chance? Right.
So, I mean, just an example, the first big narcotic case I had of that nature, which the guy was charged with a kingpin statute, life imprisonment if he's convicted. I kept their principal witness on the witness stand for 9 days. 9 days. And there had been a wiretap on her phone, and she cooperated. And I listened to every single hour of a 2-month-long wiretap. That's a lot of time to be listening. Most attorneys don't. The prosecutor says, listen, we're going to use these 10 recordings or these 20 recordings. And most defense attorneys just listen to what the prosecutor is offering and never go the extra mile. I not only listen to every single recording because I want to hear the nuance of what's going on, but I hired a black professor who was a professor of ethnography, the study of the urban center and the language of the urban culture, to listen to all those recordings. And he helped me immeasurably as to how to cross-examine that witness. And so, for example, on one of the conversations, she's on the phone talking about with a guy, and he says, well, where are you? And she says, I'm in Queens negotiating this narcotic trafficking deal. And the guy says, great, and blah, blah, blah. Well, since the phone that was being tapped was in Manhattan, she was lying on the phone to this guy because she couldn't have been in Queens, New York, if we were hearing the conversation. And so every instance like that, I pointed out that the agents weren't listening
to their own stuff.
They were hearing, but they weren't listening. And therefore, you couldn't credit what was on those recordings as being truthful. Normally, the agents would say, or the prosecutor would say, hey, listen, they didn't know that they were being recorded, and therefore what you hear is the truth. But it wasn't the truth. We knew everything that she was saying were lies to people to make herself appear more important. She would say, I know my client. She would say, I know him. And I had the black professor get on the witness stand and say, to black people, to know doesn't mean that you have met. It means you know of that person. And all that worked out for us. I mean, it was just, they did stupid things during the trial. They put a witness on, Dieter Nagel, I'll never forget him, German guy who was the BMW dealer who said he sold my client a car. And when they asked him to identify the person who he had sold the car to, he looked in the jury, towards the jury box, and then at the prosecutor's table, and then to my table before identifying my client. And I said to him, why'd you look at the jury box? He said, the prosecutor told me to do it. Why'd you look at the prosecutor's table? Prosecutor told me to do it. Did you know my client when you saw him was a guy? He said, no, but they told me you'd be a black guy sitting next to the guy in the suit.
Wow.
So these are what allow you to win.
Details.
These details.
Yeah.
And so these things, and the more I kept winning the narcotic cases, the more the government was annoyed.
And did you feel that? I mean, Robert, has that happened? You know, you're in a fraternity really of attorneys, more or less. Even if you're in private practice, you kind of all are in the same on defense world. And then you've got the prosecutor. Did you feel that this ire was building as you continue to get bigger and more successful with these cases?
Every case, every single case built on it. The first big narcotic case I was telling you about, the government subpoenaed me at the beginning of the case to find out how much my client paid me.
I saw that. What is that? Rudy Giuliani that was in that? Yeah.
I run into Rudy and
that was an unusual thing because they have the ability to do that in a grand jury, but it doesn't happen hardly at all. But it was in this case.
Right. So I knew Rudy for years at that point, and I run into him in the elevator and I say, with all the bad guys out there, why me?
Mm-hmm.
He said, right judge, right case, right defendant. I said, I won't repeat what I said to him. And then, we beat the subpoena.
Yeah.
I didn't have to give the information up. I refused to be a witness against my client, which is what I would have been.
Sure.
If I established how much he paid me and he's only reporting $20,000 a year on his tax returns, they would say this was unexplained wealth, and they would be against him. And this happened repeatedly. They kept subpoenaing me, and they kept making claims that I was unethical because they couldn't believe I could be winning unless I was unethical or doing something untoward.
Sure.
And I would say, no, I'm not doing anything other than proving that you're not doing your job.
Which would only make them unhappy and more aggressive that they don't want you doing what you're doing.
Right.
Right.
Colleagues who like to go into court and shake the prosecutor's hand and how are you doing and go to events with them. I did none of that.
Right. Right. There were no Christmas parties or country club functions. You were hanging out with them. Right.
It was war, because to lose meant my clients could go away for forever.
Yeah.
And I wasn't prepared to have that happen. And so I kept winning. And the more I won, the more my reputation spread. Having been in prison, we know how the prison grapevine works. As I kept winning, my name got circulated everywhere.
Yeah, I'm positive that you didn't have to do a lot of advertising, Robert.
I did not. So I wound up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and then LA and Greenville, South Carolina. But everywhere I went, the government kept harassing me.
Yeah.
And claiming I was doing something wrong. And we had another incident where I had to litigate their claims of unethical conduct in the early 1990s. And so we won, and the Court of Appeals, it's a higher court in New York, said he's doing just what he's supposed to do. He's being zealous on behalf of clients. Nonetheless, it didn't make the government any happier with me. And then I said, well, I got this white collar case I'm going to go into, Christopher Dragul.
Yes. Let's talk about that.
So Chris was a banker in a 6-person office of the Italian National State Bank, Banca Nazionale del Lavoro. And they had a 6-person office in Atlanta that could do nothing, had a $2 million limit to how much they could borrow. But Chris was borrowing billions. Now, you can't borrow billions in America without the Fed knowing about it, or the state banking people knowing about it, because it's all over the wires that you're doing it.
Sure. You can't even deposit $5,000 anymore without the government knowing about it.
And so that they claim that he did this without them knowing about it, and that he was attempting to defraud them, was extraordinary. So in any event, we go to and we beat up Saddam Hussein, and then Bush comes back in the Department of Justice, and they say, hey, this guy Dragul, he did it all by himself. Banca Nacional didn't know about it. The U.S. didn't know about it. In any event, the intelligence sections of our government so disliked the concept that the Bush administration was lending Saddam Hussein money that they started coming to me and meeting with me sub rosa to tell me information about the Bush administration and who was involved in the loans that went through the Atlanta office to Saddam.
So deep within the CIA, you're getting information that, hey, this is what's going on.
Right. So the deputy director of the CIA, the former deputy director, Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, calls me up and he says, listen, you're going about your defense all wrong. Meet me, because the government had dumped 500,000 documents on me to look at, these what they call CIPA classified documents, like in the Trump case in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to, as unethical as the government ultimately said I was, I had the same security clearance as the President of the United States at that time, because I was reading his daily morning briefings
Mm-hmm.
of the classified documents. So I guess I wasn't that unethical back then.
To get that clearance.
In any event, I digress. And so Inman says to me, come to the St. Regis Ballroom, a big hotel in New York City, and meet me in the ballroom tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I go. There's nobody in the ballroom except a single solitary figure sitting in the middle of the ballroom, dust coming off through the sun rays behind the curtains. And I go, and he says to me, here's why you're doing this wrong. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to write a document that says X, Y, and Z. Write this down exactly as I'm telling you. They'll know that you have a backdoor entry to their information, and it will scare them. So I did it and wrote it up. And as happened in that case, because of the classified documents, they sent marshals up from D.C. who took the document, put it in a briefcase, handcuffed the briefcase to their wrists, took it back, declassified it, sent the original and the declassified version to the judge in Atlanta, and the government crazy. So there were 347 counts in the indictment at that point.
That's a lot of counts.
Dropped 180 counts overnight, hoping that would avoid the U.S. being defrauded, and so we would be unable to present that information in court. I subpoenaed the president, Herbert Walker Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, the Secretary of State, Jim Baker, the National Security Advisor, Brent Scowcroft, Henry Kissinger, among others, and they went berserk. Kissinger calls me up. Do you know who you're talking to? Do you know who you subpoenaed? And they had the former Attorney General of the United States, Griffin Bell, call me. I represent Bush. You can't subpoena the president. I said, well, I can, and I did. So the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals agreed that I could subpoena him, and then the administrations changed, and Clinton came in, and Janet Reno came in as AG, and she called me up and she said, listen, this can't happen. We're going to offer him a 6-month plea.
Which he was sentenced, he was life in prison.
Right. He's going to have a 6-month plea instead of a life imprisonment. The trial is set to start in 6 months, so he'll have finished the sentence before the trial is scheduled to start. I said, well, I'll take it to him, and he said yes.
6 months before trial.
He took the deal. He gets out in September. He's working in a motel on the supervised release. Later, he's poisoned and dies.
You were working on his story.
We were working on selling his story. We had an article appear in Vanity Fair, which called him the fall guy. We uncovered the fact that Bush, together with the Prime Minister of Italy, Andreotti, and Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of England, had created this loan program, agricultural loan program, that they put through the Atlanta branch of
And
that
then it went through to Saddam Hussein.
to send the money to him. Even Saddam was communicating with me, trying to help me because
That's crazy. That's just crazy. But I mean, that should have been a movie. I mean, my gosh. I mean, what you just told there.
he would have people meet with me outside the UN on before a weekend or before the weekend. I would tell them the questions I would have. They would fly back, then they'd come back, and then they'd give me the information. He wanted me to come meet him, but my wife says,
no.
And I didn't. So, but in the end, it worked out for Chris, other than being killed by someone, and devastating to his family. We all have been through the experience of how devastating prison can be.
Yep.
The government kept him in prison the whole time, from the time he was arrested until the end of his sentence. And they would never let him out. And when I finally went into the case, I got a guy, I called up a fellow named Ross Perot, who had run for president.
20% he got as an independent.
And
92.
Texas billionaire. And I say to him, hey, I have this case in Atlanta. They won't let my client out. And I'm looking for somebody who might put up bail money for him. And he said, go to court. Took my call. I was surprised at that.
Mm-hmm.
Took my call, said to me, whatever amount it is, you just tell the judge, I'll put it up.
Wow.
And when I went to the judge and told the prosecutors and the judge, he's the guy who'll put up the bail, all of a sudden the government said, oh, no, it has nothing to do with the amount of money or this. We think the Iraqis will kill them. Now, I couldn't tell them I was in touch with Saddam because he was blacklisted by the State Department and U.S. Customs. I couldn't communicate theoretically with him, but I was. And so we never got him out on bail.
Wow. Well, before we go into, because I want to go into how your nightmare got started, Robert, and because it had to have been such a surreal thing for you to have been involved in all these things, and then all of a sudden you're looking at the barrel of the gun pointed at you. Before we do, I just want to recognize Nightmare Success Podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Mondays, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. For information, go to prisonus.org. That's prisonus.org. Start here. So, Robert, I know
the head of that organization, Jeff Grant, is a fabulous guy.
He is.
And I hired Jeff out of law school.
Which I did not know until you told me that when we communicated.
So he's really a terrific young man. He's not a young man anymore, a young man then, but I still look at him that way. And has done so much for so many in this field. And the organization is so worthwhile for so many. It's an outlet for them to be able to communicate with others who have been through the experience. It's an opportunity to not only share, but to hear of other people's experiences that help you get through what went on.
I totally agree. And I think sometimes, Robert, the point that you just made, just hearing that other people are going through what you're going through can, save you from whatever you're thinking you're going to do. You're all of a sudden realize you're not alone, and you can communicate and be heard by other people that have experienced the same things. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. And Jeff has an incredible story. I forget what episode he is, but for those who listen, and haven't heard that one, that's a great episode with Jeff Grant. So let's go in, Robert, to you're having this incredible journey that you've been on as a criminal defense attorney with these clients and these people that you get in contact with, and you're experiencing the world as it is, as you want it to be. Thinking being at the top of your profession is a pretty big deal in this world. And then you have this guy from Guyana, and he's and the other thing that's interesting about him, because I went back and looked at, he had a lot of different things going on. I mean, he was an entrepreneur. He was cleaning up the streets, and he was a drug kingpin, and there was all kinds of things wrong into all that. How did you ever actually get to him? What in that world? What was the connection?
So I had represented a lot of high-profile narcotic traffickers, and as a result, one of them had suggested I go see him at the prison. And part of the discussing process of what happens in our system is that if the government can, they will keep you in prison pre-trial. They do it for any number of reasons. They do it to isolate you.
Mm-hmm.
They do it to make you want to cooperate with them.
Mm-hmm. Very effective.
Very effective. And we have what we call the federal sentencing guidelines, which is a sentencing process, which basically tells every judge, listen, if a guy's convicted of this or that, you look at this grid, and that's what his sentence will be like. And so when you're arrested and you're thrown into prison for the first time in your life, you come in contact with all the people who were there already, and they say, hey, don't bother to get an attorney because you're going to lose 98% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're facing this amount of time. So you got two choices: plead guilty early or cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
In any event, in that world, my clients recommended that I go see this guy. And you do what we call a beauty contest. And lawyers go in to see the client in prison, and they say, I can be the best person for you because I can do X. I didn't really like doing that, and I didn't really have to do it because I had a sufficient reputation, whatever it was,
Mm-hmm.
to go in and say, I represent Fat Cat Nichols and Kenneth Supreme McGriff and Tommy Montana Mickens.
Guys that are in songs.
And guys who are in songs.
Yeah.
And so he hired me, and the United States had kidnapped him and brought him to the United States, which to me is always a bad thing when we go around kidnapping or doing rendition on people.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I could help him, and I thought maybe in the interest of justice they would say we don't accept that, but actually the United States does accept that. So everything in the interest of the end result for the government, not necessarily justice for all.
Mm-hmm.
In any event, so I start to represent him, and I hired 17 investigators all over the country to help me gather information about witnesses. He had what we always love as a defense attorney. He had money.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, he had the ability to defend himself, which is not easy against the government. They use unlimited sources of money, and we are limited to what our client can afford, if anything.
Right.
So I was doing what I thought appropriate for him. I hired 5 attorneys to assist me on various other aspects of a trial, including the illegal kidnapping. I went through all that. And
they make a lot about the press conference that was in Guyana, and that I thought that was interesting because you had gone over there.
Go ahead.
And they had that when you look all this up, that they make a really big deal about that as a significant event.
So Guyana is a third world country,
Mm-hmm.
a really violent country where at that time and for decades before, the black population and the Indian population did not get along at all. The blacks often killed many Indians, and the government was split up. The head of the government was Indian. The military and the police were black, and never the twain shall meet. My client had been a hero in Guyana because he had rid the country of the worst of the black gangs.
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, and he was very friendly with the president of the country. So when I began to represent him, the United States State Department wanted his help. They wanted him to convince the president of Guyana to allow the United States Navy to dock a ship off of Guyana and to be able to spy on Venezuela and Hugo Chavez.
Interesting.
But I said, fine, he'll do it. Dismiss the charges, agree that the kidnapping was illegal, and we'll send him back and he'll be a source for you.
Mm-hmm.
The prosecutors said, no, we want him to plead guilty and cooperate in drug cases. I said, well, if he gets on the witness stand for you, he can't be also helping you as a source down in Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
In any event, the deal fell through. I'm working the case. We're getting ready for trial. He tells me, listen, there are recordings of some people that you want to call as witnesses against me that I made in Guyana. I'll get you the tapes and maybe you can introduce them at trial. I say, okay. He gets me the tapes. I listen to the tapes. I say, these are really good. I tell the government and the judge, I want to introduce these tapes come trial time. And the government says, well, we want to see the equipment that he used to record these. I say, why? They say, because we have a right to do it. The judge says, they do. I'm directing you to get it. I call the people I know in Guyana, and I tell them to send it up. In the meantime, I'm going down to Guyana, terrible place to visit.
Mm-hmm.
I had bodyguards with no weapons going around with me and thinking that I could be maybe harmed at any point. He's such a big figure in Guyana, my client, Roger Khan, that the press is chasing me from pillar to post. And I say to all of them, listen, I'll meet you in the lobby of my hotel at one time, and I'll tell you why I'm here and what we're doing. And you can ask any questions you want. And I do. I meet him in the lobby.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. ambassador was actually sitting on the other side of the room having lunch while I was having this press conference. And I went over, I introduced myself to him, and then I went back, I had the so-called press conference. I say, we're looking for information about any of these people. So if anybody's got any, please contact us. I get back to the U.S., the prosecutors asked that the judge throw me off the case and sanction me for having essentially threatened their witnesses by the press conference. I say, well, listen, we haven't even set a trial date. It's maybe a year off. You're claiming I'm going to be somehow harming the jury pool, which hasn't been selected yet, on a press conference in a country in another continent.
Right.
That wasn't reported by any of our newspapers, and nobody would have heard about it.
That's what I thought was interesting.
Nonetheless, the judge agreed with them and said, I'm not going to sanction you, but don't do it again. And I say, okay. But the way it was written up in the newspapers, I looked like I was a bad guy for having it.
Yeah.
So we move forward, and the case is supposed to take off and go to trial in March of 2008. The government wants a delay. The judge wants a delay. I say, no, he's in prison. They delay the case for 6 months. About a month later, a person who my client had once asked me to meet with, who had been an informant of his in Guyana, contacts me and says, listen, I can help you. Can I come meet with you? I say, sure. He comes to the office. He meets with myself and my staff. And he says, I want to help you because I'm Guyanese. You can't approach the people in the Guyanese community here in Queens, New York, but I can. I know them all. We're a small community, and they are. It's really a very small country.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows everybody. If you've been to the Caribbean, you know how people are. Everybody's my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say, okay. But I know that most people who want to help, particularly in federal criminal cases, are afraid to help.
Mm-hmm.
And so because they're afraid to help, they're afraid they'll get in trouble also. I say, I got to flatter this guy like I do every witness, how important he is to me. I say, you'll make a great witness at the trial. You'll be this. We need you. We need you. And I knew I could never use him as a witness. First of all, he had told me that he was in the country illegally. If he took the witness stand, the marshals are going to grab him, throw him in the prison cell, and deport him. But I tell him, you're going to be a great witness. Prosecutors and defense lawyers constantly lie to people in an effort to get them the help.
Right. To get what they need.
Right. In the meantime, I didn't know he was scripted by the government to bring up violence. And he'd say to me things like, everybody loves their mother. All right. Yes, I agree. And he says, so one of the witnesses' mothers is living here in Queens now. I said, you can't kill this guy's mother. I mean, this is not Guyana. But I didn't say to him, you can't kill anybody else's mother. I just said, you can't kill his mother. So the government ultimately used that against me to say, you only mention that guy's mother. I said, why would I mention anybody else's? He didn't bring it up. But nonetheless, so they kept bringing up violence, and I just ignored it, or I would say to him, I understand. Everybody who comes in your office, even white collar people,
Mm-hmm.
say, yeah, I'd love to kill that agent. I'd like to kill that prosecutor. I'd like to kill that judge for what he just did. They don't mean it.
Mm-hmm.
Just a figure of speech. And so it rolls off me like water off of a duck's back. When the violence is not working with me, then I'm not authorizing violence. And I send them an email saying, don't do anything untoward out there. The government will take it the wrong way. They then have him start to come to me and suggest bribery of witnesses. And I say to him, I don't really care what you tell these people. Just get them to my office. He says, well, give me $5,000 and I'll get an affidavit. I say to him, an affidavit is not admissible. Bring the person here.
Mm-hmm.
Can I tell them they're going to get $5,000? Yeah, tell them anything you want. So he finally agrees to bring somebody in. I tell my staff, all right, prepare a subpoena, prepare a $40 check made out to the witness, because that's all the federal procedure allows, $40 checks, witness fee, and we'll meet with the person. And instead of that witness showing up, 9 agents showed up, and they arrested me. So that was the beginning of a horrific 12 years.
And how long did the process last, Robert, from that moment until you got to the actual trial?
You know, I was arrested September 10, 2008. I wanted a speedy trial because, one, I didn't think I had done anything.
Mm-hmm.
All my friends kept telling me, don't represent yourself. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say, I think I should.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wins more than me. Why would I have somebody else? So I picked another person who I was friendly with, who was considered one of the top lawyers in New York, maybe in the country.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, he did a terrible job. And I've regretted that decision ever since. The impact of my arrest on my family then and since then has been the most significant aspect of my life. To have my 7-year-old son be abused by his classmates who don't know any better except what they hear from their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Father's going to prison. He'll never come home again, they would say to him. My daughter, who was 15 at the time, going through similar type things. It was on every news station in New York and nationally, and
Mm-hmm.
my arrest. That more than anything else breaks your heart what you do to your family. And
Well, and you got, I mean, the other thing was, Robert, I mean, you got a big sentence. I mean, it wasn't like that they sent you away for 3 to 5 years. They gave you 14 years. And
I mean, I've been around the business a long time. I've never seen a lawyer get sentenced to more than 5 years in prison unless he was an active member of a drug cartel. At trial, that's how they portrayed me, though. They would say, they put up a organizational chart. That's with photos of everybody
mm-hmm.
in my client's drug organization. And there was my young associate, who was also indicted,
Mm-hmm.
20 years old, and myself at the top of the chart. We couldn't believe it. But here it was. We were getting hit with the same things that my clients got hit with.
Did it seem really strange though, coming, living that world for since you were in your 20s, and then all of a sudden everything's pointed back at you?
I blame Steve Jobs for what happened to me. The iPhone had just come out a month before my trial, and my
Mm-hmm.
bought a new iPhone, and he spent the entire time in trial trying to figure out how to work the new iPhone. Attention to what was going on in the courtroom. And I would say to him, Jerry, what are you doing? He would say, well, it's got this feature too. I would say, pay attention and object.
Yeah, this is a big deal.
We had a judge who had once tried to prosecute my attorney, who never liked me. We had not been friendly when he was a prosecutor, nor when he was a judge.
Yeah.
We couldn't get rid of him. Although you see all the time how they get rid of judges, you can't get rid of a judge basically unless they do something really terrible.
Yeah.
Although he had once sought to prosecute my attorney and didn't like me, that wasn't enough to get him off the case. And he did everything he could to harm me during the trial. I got back to the tape recordings a little while ago, and the government charged me not only with attempted witness tampering, but with possession of the recording equipment that the federal judge had directed me to
get.
They found it in my office on the day they arrested me. Who could believe I'd be prosecuted for following the direction of a judge
Mm-hmm.
at the prosecutor's request? Nonetheless, they brought in the manufacturer of the equipment from England, and they had 5 of the 7 witnesses in my trial testify about the wiretap equipment. The trial took 6 days. The jury deliberated 7 days, and then they found both of us guilty of everything. It was
What was going through your mind? I mean, I can't imagine like going through all that. 6 days, 7 days, they come back, and then they find you guilty of it. What with you, your wife, your kids? What was going on in your world?
as an experienced attorney, a jury that deliberates, usually you don't go and you don't keep a jury as long as this judge kept that jury.
Mm-hmm.
Because after 3 days of being deadlocked on a 6-day trial, you could say we can repeat the 6-day trial pretty quick
Mm-hmm.
in 6 days.
Mm-hmm.
So, but he kept them and kept them and kept them. We kept telling him to declare a mistrial, and he wouldn't do it. And ultimately, he wore the jury down. He allowed the government to make arguments to the jury that were outrageous. They would say he hangs with killers. He's a friendly with killers. He's part of them. And they would use examples like one of my client's friends in Guyana had the um, email silentassassin@yahoo.com.
Mm.
And they argued to the jury, look who he hangs with, people who call themselves silent assassins. I said, I can't believe this. I didn't do very well on the witness stand because I was me.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe like Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm,
That's one of my favorite shows.
I have a tendency to be me. And
Yeah.
as I see him this season preparing to go to trial,
Yeah, for the water
I
bottle.
say that was probably how I was on the witness stand.
Yeah.
Um, and in the end, we were convicted. I said, well, we'll probably give me 3 years, 4 years. That'll be terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And then when 65 attorneys from around the country wrote letters to the sentencing judge saying, listen, what he did is what you as prosecutors and we as prosecutors and we as defense attorneys say every day. He didn't say anything unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Don't punish him for doing that. And he responded, I've read those letters and I am going to show them something today. And so we knew something terrible might follow, and it did. He sentenced me to 14 years in prison.
Which, you know, when you go to 14 years in prison, that knocks you out of the camp level because I think you have to have 10 years or less, right?
Right. He gave me more time than he gave my client, the drug dealer.
Mm.
So you couldn't go to a camp. And although I know most of the people who appear on your show have gone to a camp and they talk about how difficult that was, it's nothing like going to a different kind of a prison.
Mm-hmm.
And they arranged, supposedly for my safety, to send me to Big Springs, Texas, 4 hours southwest of Dallas,
Mm-hmm.
to a prison where they claimed nobody would know who I was. But when I got there, everybody knew who I was, in part because the staff told everybody who I was,
Mm-hmm.
in part because of the 2 clients I had in federal prison at the time. One was there, unbeknownst to me,
Mm-hmm.
and they had asked him, was he okay with my being on the same facility as him? And so
I can imagine, Robert, that you were probably, you know, respect is something in prison that it's one of those common threads that runs through, and the people that you had represented and how vigorously and aggressively you represented these people. Like I said, a lot of them were in rap songs. I mean, the people that you've represented are very well known, and a lot of the the culture that you know, through the 90s to 2000s. I'm assuming that when you walked through there, that you were someone that was respected.
I was, and coincidentally, although I have heard you tell the story about being on a show on TV that all the people in the
That was bad.
that was bad. The third day I was in prison, there was an interview. It was a show about one of my clients,
Okay.
McGriff, and I'm prominently featured in the story. And I said, well, anybody who didn't know who I was, they
Now they know now.
and within the next few weeks, I got approached by I'll get back to your respect part. I get approached by the head of the one of the Mexican gangs, and he says to me, your client Tommy is here, and he's not happy. And I thought that was untrue, and I thought he was going to be trying to put the arm or extort me for money.
Mm-hmm.
But I get on the phone to my attorneys and I say, hey, all this nonsense about my coming here, nobody would know who I was. They had my client sign a waivers to be on the same facility as me. And the next day, I hear over the loudspeaker my name come to the lieutenant's office. And when you go to the lieutenant's office in prison, nothing good can
It's
happen.
never good, right?
So I get there and they say, we think that you're in danger. Then they throw me into solitary confinement for 2 months.
Mm.
And then they tell me they're going to ship me back east. And they shipped me to Oklahoma City. And there
That's never good either.
No, there at Oklahoma City, I was thrown in solitary confinement again because I was an SIS. It's a special category for high
They're
profile.
the investigators inside the prison.
Right,
The SIS, and that's never good either.
right. So a CIM. I was a CIM, essential
Okay.
monitoring.
Okay.
And so I get in the shoe there, and then I'm told, oh, you're not going home. You're going further west to Safford, Arizona. And there, to get to the part of the story you were mentioning before, I get off the bus and the white boys approach me and say, you're sitting with us in the dining hall because in prison, not camps, but in prison, you find out that you either sit with people you are permitted to sit with or you don't sit at all.
Mm-hmm.
In those days, pedophiles, sex offenders were not permitted to sit with anybody but other pedophiles and sex offenders or live with other ones. And they couldn't watch TV. And that's true in higher prisons, that each group has their own TV and nobody else can go in there. And if it's in a room, there's only so many seats and so many people who are permitted to go in there. It's often seniority based, but whatever. I get to Safford, and I had developed along the way from Oklahoma City to Safford a relationship with a number of the black inmates who all knew me. They were from the East Coast, but knew of me and knew of my clients. And when I got to Safford and the white boys said, you have to sit with us, I went to them and said, I don't want to sit with the white boys. That's not way of being. And so they went to the head of the blacks in the prison, and he said, you can sit with us. And so in the dining hall, there was a sea of black on one part of the dining hall and one white face.
There was Robert.
But
That's respect.
that respect got me through prison. Everybody, and I didn't get bothered too much for legal advice, but I was.
How did you do your time, Robert? Like, that's a lot of time. What was your strategies in prison to get through your time?
It seemed like 500 years to me.
I bet it did.
As you know, every day in prison is like a week or a month, no matter whether you're at a camp or otherwise. But I walked a lot. I read over 3,500 books during that time. I kept to myself. And keeping to yourself is not always easy.
Yeah.
I worked out to the extent that I was permitted to work out.
Yeah.
And I was basically allowed to use weights or other exercise equipment. A lot of people are not. And you not only have to be able to get permission to use that equipment, but a time slot that you could use it.
Yeah.
So my time slot actually, when I was in Texas, was 6 o'clock in the morning when the prison first opened for 30 minutes. It was changed at Safford. In Safford, you could get time midday because it was 109 degrees every day. So nobody was outside working out.
Well, the other thing I was really impressed with your story and having the weight of that and the time of that, your family stuck together. And that's so, first of all, it's unusual because, I mean, you and I both know, Robert, we were with a lot of people that didn't happen. And they went through even darker periods because their family didn't I think that's really incredible that your family did stay.
There are so few people who maintain their relationships with their family, and the Bureau of Prisons,
Doesn't make it easy.
prisons make it very difficult
Yes.
to continue a relationship. You'd think they want you to communicate,
Well, they say they do,
have a role,
and in the literature that you read.
right?
But as far as actually getting that happening and visits and all the things that you want to keep that communication going, they'll give you so many minutes to talk a day on the phone, all those different things. You know, we wonder why are these rules here like this?
Everything my clients had complained about, and I said, yeah, "You're making too much of this." Everything they said was true. You say 300 minutes a month, 10 minutes a day,
Just 10 minutes a day.
to be able to speak to your family, your children,
Mm-hmm.
your wife, your parents, your friends.
Yeah. And why limit that?
Not enough time. And for those who can't afford the cost of emails, and every email costs money.
Yeah.
The
It's like 5 cents a minute, I think, on core links. You got to type pretty quick.
I know. It's terrible what they do to try to terminate the relationship or not care if the relationship is terminated. But my wife, Evelyn, and my children, there aren't words to describe what they did for me and to themselves. They got on a plane when I was in Texas and flew to Houston, and from Houston flew over to Midland, Texas, and then took a rental car from there over to the prison in a terrible little town that looked like this place where Psycho was shot. And then they did the same in Safford to fly into Phoenix, Arizona, and then travel 3.5 hours by car down to the prison through the mountains, through treacherous roads.
It's incredible.
And then and then they did the same in Allenwood, Pennsylvania, and then to Danbury, Connecticut. And not only is that awful,
Mm-hmm.
but until you've seen your family have to go through a visiting line,
Mm-hmm.
until it may be different in the camps, but I know it's different in the camps, but in a real prison, they are told what kind of clothes they can wear. If they don't wear the right kind of clothes, they're told you can't go in.
Yeah, they still have that in the camp. Many people got turned away because somebody was at the desk that day and just didn't like what they were wearing.
And that's always the thing that happens. Mm-hmm. I mean, and they'll pick on different races too. And
sure.
They shouldn't.
Or if they think that you get a lot of visits, what they would do with my wife was just say, he's out of points after she'd driven 4.5 hours. I wasn't out of points, but there's absolutely nothing you can do about it.
There's nothing you can do. And then if they want to say the visit can only be an hour because we got a lot of people waiting, you
nothing you can do.
Nothing to do about that also.
Right.
So depending on the guard who's checking them in, who wants to fool around or wants to be a terrible person for no reason, they have to wait in the lobby. Or when they finally get in, they tell you can't let your kids sit on your lap. And I said,
yeah,
7 years old.
Yeah.
No, you can get one kiss, one hug. That's it. And then you say, how do you explain that to a 7-year-old? How do you explain that to your daughter, to anybody else, that you're not allowed to show affection to them?
Yeah, no, it's almost impossible to make that explanation at those ages. Well, let's talk about this because you go through all this. You survived this, Robert. You survived this whole journey of all these locations you're in. Your family goes through this. You get your routine in prison, but you're getting out. I can't imagine as you're getting close to the door. What are you thinking as you get close to getting out?
Well, I still had 2 years to go when the First Step Act was passed.
Okay.
And that had a provision in it for people over 70, and I was over 70.
Mm-hmm.
But I had been turned down by the Bureau of Prisons to go to camps, even though I was eligible after my first year. So I had no anticipation that I would be successful putting in a request to do that. I got a Jewish organization, Aleph, involved in
I've heard of them. Yeah.
pursuing my trying to get this relief to go to home confinement. And my case manager, the guy who oversees you and a bunch of other people there, said to me, I don't even know how this works. And I say, I'll help you get through the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
And so I help him get through the paperwork and we put it in. And he says, I don't know what happens from here, but something may happen or maybe not. We'll put in a date, November 5. I say, okay. I have no idea what's happening or not happening for a couple of months. And on November 4, I'm in the dining hall and somebody approaches me and says, the warden wants to speak to you. And I walk over to her and she says, congratulations, you're the first person who's going home on this program.
Wow.
I say, I'm glad to hear that because I know nothing about it. But in prison, in the federal system, when you're going someplace, one institution to another or going home, they shut your phones off the day before and your emails. So I had no way of telling my wife that I was coming home.
That is crazy. I so identify with that too, Robert, because they cut mine off 5 days before I got, because it was during Thanksgiving and so it was a Wednesday and I didn't get out until Monday. And so it was crazy that they do that. And I should have gotten out on Friday, but because, it's the holidays, nobody looks. But that is such a weird feeling, isn't it? That you're cut off from the world.
And so I go to what they call R&D, receiving and discharge, to say to them, am I going home tomorrow? And they say, we can't tell you.
Right. You can't know.
Not. They say, we can't tell you. An inmate comes up to me and says, listen, what time are you leaving? Because I've been assigned to your cell. So I know I'm leaving at that point.
Yeah.
But how to now convey this to my wife? Now, I had told her a couple of days before then, I don't know if I'm getting out on the 5th, but my suggestion is come drive to the prison that morning. Maybe it'll happen and maybe it won't. So
that's crazy.
But they're not telling me anything. But that was a date that we had picked 2 months ago. So I got out that morning. I looked across, I saw her car.
Wow.
And raced over, got in the car and left.
Get out of here. Robert, that is a great story. I can't believe that you thought enough about the fact that I don't know if this was going to happen. Let's do November 5th. And there she was.
There was, and so you spend the rest of the afternoon on the day before giving away everything
all your stuff.
Other inmates.
Yes. So you better be going home.
So, if you don't go home, you have nothing.
Exactly.
It's like the there when you have nothing.
And then having all your stuff in prison, I know that sounds kind of odd for people listening, but that is your only world, is your stuff. And once you give it away, you're starting from scratch.
Hey, if they can imagine what a little refrigerator looks like, a little cooler that you might have with a couple of shelves in it, that's what the lockers look like.
Yeah, that's your world.
Keep all of our worldly possessions in.
That's right.
You had more than you should. Guards would come by if they were being difficult, and they were, and take your extra stuff. If you had a pen, you weren't entitled to have. If you had a yellow highlighter, you weren't entitled to have. If you had too many of this or that, if you had a nail clipper and they had done away with the idea of allowing inmates to have nail clippers while I was in, they took those away. If you had too much food, they took it away. They threw it.
Very humbling.
It was
very humbling.
Humbling is maybe the height.
Exactly. Well, Robert, let's talk about what you're doing now. Because I think do you still do your radio show?
I don't do it anymore, and I
Okay.
don't because the radio station sold the radio
Okay.
to another company.
Okay.
I have been speaking to various groups. I've spoke at Yale, and I've
Yeah.
spoken at Pace Law School, and I'm anticipating other places as well. I've done some public speaking, but for the most part, I've been doing consulting work and some real estate work. Unfortunately, my plans were dashed apart. Although I was coming home on home confinement,
Yeah.
came home on November 5, 2019. On March 13, 2020, we had the pandemic.
Yeah. The whole world shut down.
Right. So for 2 years, I was basically, I had no excuse to offer my probation officer as to why I had to leave the house.
Right.
No,
Everybody's locked down.
so I couldn't really work. I couldn't do this. And for the most part, I was working on writing a book that may never get published. But
I think it would be a fascinating book. I hope it does get published because I think your story with all the different things, you come from all these different places, and then you've got the survival part of it that you're on the other side of this whole tragedy, nightmare, whatever you call these things, and you're here. You're talking about it, and it's fascinating. And I think you can help so many people too. I think, because of your background, because of your experience, and helping people know that they can live through it is a big deal.
it is
And your legal experience, obviously.
legal consulting for people. I tell them that if you allow me to act as your ombudsman,
Mm-hmm.
from the time you want to hire an attorney, I can tell you
I would have loved to have had you.
who you ought to hire. I can listen to you. You know, your attorneys really don't want to hear what you have to say.
No, I would have loved to have had you, Robert. I would have given my right arm. I wouldn't give you my left arm because I'm left-handed, but I'd give you my right one.
I've told people for years, no attorney's listening to you 24/7 or thinking
Right.
of your case 24/7, but you are. So I tell them, and you know more about the case than I may ever know.
Yeah.
By the time I get to trial, I'll know more than you do. But tell me everything that you think is important or not important. Send me a text, send me an email, call me.
I love that.
And I still want to be able to do that because preparation is 90% of the game.
And you've shown that. You have all the experience that backs that up.
If you let me help you, I can convey to your attorneys in language they would understand how to best help you. And so I've been doing that and helping some people, not as many as I would like. I'm hoping.
I think it'd be invaluable, and I think the people listening to this today they're thinking they're in a situation that they need Robert Simels to help them through that process. Because if you have somebody like you that knows, not only have you been a prosecutor, not only have you been an incredible criminal defense attorney, but you've actually gone through being indicted and convicted and going through that process. So you are the full package. But I always say, Robert, I mean,
I wish I had two of those experiences and not that last one.
Exactly. You weren't working for that one for the check the box off. Robert, what do you think? What do you think is your biggest takeaway through all this?
Well, as I told my daughter when she finished law school, don't become a criminal attorney.
From an incredible criminal defense attorney, yeah.
Well, it's you know, the system. I've always known the system was in shambles, but until you've gone through all aspects of it,
Yeah.
your defense attorney and inmate, you don't realize how awful it is. It's not awful the way Mr. Trump says it is. It's awful because it doesn't work.
Right. It's broken.
It doesn't work because nobody cares to have it work. Judges who are elevated from, who are so, whether they're progressive or conservative, wherever their background may be, they all become the same when they take those black robes. They no longer see you. They don't want to help their own kind. They just want to sentence you to prison. in the criminal justice system,
Mm-hmm.
and you say, Judge, do you understand what a day is like in prison? No, you don't. Prosecutors, I see the prosecutors ask for 50 years for Sam Bankman-Friedman.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
He won't be in prison for 50 years, even on a 50-year sentence, but why even ask for that? Who learns their lesson in doesn't learn that lesson in 10 years?
Right.
Doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you've been there. You're being warehoused. There's no productive efforts made to rehabilitate you, if that word is still a word,
Mm-hmm.
and make you a productive member of society when you come out. Because every time something bad happens and the person had a criminal record, they say an ex-con did this. Try to get a job when you come out with a criminal record. And they say to you, where have you been the last 5 years? Where you've been the last 7 years? Wherever it may be, last year, 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
You can't reinvent yourself.
Reentry's one of the toughest things of the whole journey.
You can try to come up with a new way to go,
Yeah.
but you can never be you again.
It's one of the toughest part of the journeys is reentry, and no one really talks about it until they hit that point because they're so anxious to get out, and get back and part of the world. But yeah, you've got to carry an extra weight, and it doesn't end. You're an ex-felon until the end. That's the way it goes.
That's going to be that's your obit, no matter what you do.
Yeah, but you've got a lot to offer, Robert. And I can't wait for you to get this book out. And if you're wanting to read books, I wrote one too, Nightmare Success. Check that out on Amazon. I want to thank Homestead Financial lets me use all this stuff in this podcast room. And if you got home mortgage needs, Greg FDF is definitely your guy. If you like the show, and I know you got something out of this today, follow, share, comment. It's a big deal. Leave Apple review comments. That puts the show on steroids. Check me out on BrentCassidy.com. It's with a TY, not a DY. I spell it wrong. And as I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Robert Simels, you are a great guest. You are an incredible person. I wish you nothing but the best. Thank you so much for being on the show.
And I'm the same. And maybe one day I'll have a podcast and have you on.
I would love that. Love that. You'd be a great podcast guy too. All right, guys. Nightmare Success, in and out.
Thanks.